Really? So not just anyone can get to them. How's it safer when I'm playing outside?
Safer when walking home.
I won't have to tell so many family members. I'm sorry.
I won't hear as many scary stories.
Or scary news reports.
I won't have to hold someone's hand and shout you're gonna make it.
And I won't have to tell my kids, this isn't a drill.
Please.
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 Do it for us.
For us. Do it for us.
Your family, friends, and neighbors are all counting on you. Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. If you own a firearm and are not using it, please be responsible and be sure that it's stored in a safe place. Remember, always, lock it up. For more information on firearm storage safety, visit ncpc.org.
You turn on the television or you pick up a newspaper magazine, and all the information you see is just controlled by a handful of corporations. So how are you or I or any of us, how can we get our messages out to people? How can you tell people what you care about? You can go on Facebook and compete with hundreds of people who post things that may or may not be true. You can go on Twitter and post things with a handful of characters, because Twitter is really the place for literate people to hang out. Or you could go in with a sandwich board and walk the streets. You could write a letter to the editor. Or, even better, you could go to public access television. Public access serves your community on a first-come, first-served basis. And whether you're rich or poor, doesn't matter. It's first-come, first-served. Everyone in the community is welcome to come to public access and talk about not only the issues that are important to them, but if you have a poem to recite, a story to tell, a song to sing, just anything at all that's in your mind or heart to tell, you come to public access. Public access in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where I'm speaking right now, has been around since 1980, and I've seen it change events in Fayetteville. And the nice thing about public access now in the 21st century is that it's not just on a television channel, but it's also on the internet, so you can reach people around the world. So if you feel frustrated at not being able to talk to people, not being able to get your message out, and you think there's no way to do it, well, take heart, there is. Public access, it's a vital component of our First Amendment rights. So, public access, like the man says, use it or lose it.
Hi, my name is Ana Aguayo. I'm with the Northwest Arkansas Workers Justice Center, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Access Television.
Hi, with me tonight is Bob Losure. Bob, how are you?
Richard, the pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's nice to have you on the show. Bob, you were an anchor with CNN for a long time, weren't you?
That's right.
That's how most people probably recognize you.
You know, I did 11 and a half years there, from January of '86 to May of '97, before I took off and went freelance.
Yeah, and before that you were with KOTV.
Yeah, you know, I spent 30 years total. I started out at KTOW in Sand Springs. $1.60 an hour, Richard.
Now,
we can all talk
I can
about
relate
that.
to that, yeah.
And then got off into TV about 9 years in, and worked at KOTV in Tulsa, CBS, for 10 years.
Even going before that, what was your first experience in journalism? How did you know you wanted to do this?
I had a teacher in high school who was teaching me sophomore English, Sheila Parr, who is a friend of mine to this day. Still lives in Tulsa, where I grew up. Went to Tulsa Edison, in fact. And when I was about 15, I was doing an English report one day, and she walked up, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. She walked up next to the chair and said, "Would you like to be in my journalism class? I think you'd be a good writer. I think you have a good style." And I mean, my whole world just blossomed, Richard. I was so lucky. Got into journalism, wrote for every paper, wrote sports for the Tulsa World, wrote obituaries for the Tulsa Tribune, and then finally got into radio a few years later.
Was there anything in particular you liked to write? I mean, what like sports or crime?
Well, the obituaries weren't my favorite. Sports I loved, and I loved doing high school basketball in the days when Eddie Sutton coached at Central High School, and I can remember covering games down there. And we did one game one time where Edison was playing Webster. And I had failed my driver's test 3 times. So I had to get a good friend of mine, John Hetherington, to drive me around in his old 1950 Ford. I think it was $5 a game that I got, covering high school basketball. And I went out to cover a game at Webster Stadium, or Webster Fieldhouse. And then when I got through, I got back to the World, and Richard, I couldn't remember who had won the game.
Uh-oh.
And then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, I can't call the coaches and say, hi, I'm Bob Losure, and I covered your high school basketball game, and I don't know who won. Could you tell me who? So I called John back up. I said, do you remember who won? Because the score doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm pretty sure Edison won. I said, well, my score shows Webster won. And we went back out to the field house in his car at midnight, had the janitor who was still there turn the scoreboard lights on. Fortunately, the score was still there. And that's the first and only time in my life that I made the score match my point total, and we got the score right.
Do you think sports writing is more exciting than regular newspaper writing?
You know, one of the things that intrigues me is sports play-by-play. Had I not gone down the road of doing news, I probably would have tried to do anyway, sports play-by-play. I love a good hockey announcer or a good basketball announcer, somebody who can keep up with that end-to-end action, you know, and it's going here and here and here and here. If I could have done anything else, that's what I would have done.
Do you think political reporting would be more exciting if more of the political writers wrote like sports writers?
Well, if they could take any amount of license with the facts, give their own opinion, it would be exciting, but it would also be an editorial.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is with these political pundits that you see in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So political writing, especially in a year like this, and when you've got that Hillary Clinton, Rudy Giuliani race,
That's going to bring out the best and worst in everybody.
Well, that's quite possible. You know, for one thing, it'll bring out the national media, and it will get people thinking about, hopefully, about politics in general. You know.
So after you got out of high school and your experience with the small papers, how'd you break into television?
Boy, that was by hook and by crook. I had, you know, it's really funny.
I'm sorry, was that something you wanted to do too, break into television?
I did want to break into TV. I had done a little show called Ask an Attorney back in 1975, 25 years ago. And I did it as a freebie. I was still working in radio at KRMG in Tulsa, doing news. And I don't even know if I should tell you the story because it doesn't reflect well on me. But the fellow who had produced this show with me was a Tulsa attorney who's an attorney there to this day, Raven Martin. And Raven had the hot idea for this little public affairs show, not unlike perhaps some of the shows that you air on community access television. And he had, but his idea was to get 3 or 4 girls who were prostitutes and to kind of light them in silhouette where no one would know what they look like, but then get them out there and get them, you know, talking about different things. Well, the show got out of hand, and they started talking about prices and what price got what, and pretty soon one of the lights out there keeled over, throwing light on all their faces. And here we were on a public affairs show for the Tulsa County Bar Association with this crazy, crazy video. And of course they ran it. They had nothing else to do but run it. And then of course they asked me to leave the show the next week. And that was my closest, brush with that. You are alluding, I'm sure, to my going into KOTV.
Yeah.
When I first came down
I like that story, though.
I was working at KRMG, and I knew they had a new news director at KOTV. His name was Jack Bowen from Oklahoma City. He'd been there just 2 weeks, and I thought, well, here's my chance. So I had my polyester leisure suit on and my two-tone shoes and my clip-on tie and everything, and I went down there, and I was, just hoping against hope to do an audition. And so he let me audition outside, and then I came inside and did some anchoring, and I read right off the teleprompter on the end of that lens, and probably my eyes were going like this, across the prompter. And I got back into the director's booth, and Jack was like this. After I'd done my audition, he was asleep. I put him to sleep.
So he wasn't mesmerized?
Oh, he was not mesmerized. Not, he was tranquilized is what he was. And Richard, there he was, and I had to wake him up, and I knew I didn't get the job. And I said, well, Mr. Bowen, you want to call me or do you want me to call you? And he said, no, Bob, I'll call you. Don't you call me. In other words, don't you ever call me. I'll call you. And sure enough, he never called. And 2 weeks went by, and I finally called the station. I said, I'd like to speak to Mr. Jack Bowen. And they said he no longer works here. So he probably took a cue from my audition that if this was the quality of talent, that he didn't want to work there. So he'd gone, and I said, well, I don't know what to do. And they said, well, would you like to talk to our general manager, Mr. Dwayne Harm? And I said, fine. And I got Mr. Harm on the phone, and I said, Mr. Harm, Bob Losure, KRMG, man on the move, Bob in the traffic, car 74. And he said, I know who you are, Bob, that's fine. And I said, well, I auditioned for Jack Bowen for that reporter slot here just a couple of weeks ago, and I see he's already gone. What happened? Well, you know, Bob, those things happen, and blah, blah, blah. And there was this long pause, and he said, well, Jack didn't hire you, did he? And then I waited, you know, it said, wait 3 or 4 beats, almost a Jack Benny kind of. And I said, well, you know, I thought he was leaning that way. Well, he was kind of leaning this way. That's what he was doing, asleep. And Mr. Harm said, well, how much was he going to pay you? And then I thought, I can't tell another lie here. So I said, well, it's a little more than I'm getting in radio. Just whatever, in other words, just give me anything and I'll take it. And that was how I got hired at KOTV. I don't recommend that, by the way, to future journalism students, but it's what happened.
Did you get better, though?
Well, now I'll let you judge that.
Or how long did it take you to get better?
Well, it took a long time, if indeed I got better, and you're very kind to say that. I started out reporting at KOTV in October of '76, anchored weekends beginning in 1978, moved into weeknight anchoring in '81, and then in '85, I ran into a problem with testicular cancer. I was diagnosed with that, went through, to cut to the chase here in a way, 3 operations, 3 sessions of chemotherapy. It did not go nearly as quickly or as painlessly as I say it.
That must have been pretty scary for you.
It's scary because you do face the possibility that you might not make it. And the station, I guess they decided to go on with new anchors, figuring they didn't know how long it was going to take me to recoup, if indeed I made it. So I could see my replacements on the air. And I had an agent in New York, and I called him up and I said, I think you better step on the accelerator and see if you can find something, because my hair was falling out.
Yeah.
Now it's all grown back in, but all the hair was leaving, and that's many times not a good deal if you're anchoring. And so I went to Headline News and found a certain degree of empathy from the VP of News there, Paul Amos. And he hired me, and he took a chance on me. And I was working at Headline News by January of '86. And then 3 weeks after I got there, sad to say, the shuttle Challenger exploded.
Right.
But as you know, newsrooms, they live or die on this kind of thing. And when it exploded and the crew died, it really put CNN in a whole new light, because suddenly they were the only ones covering it, CNN and Headline News, at the time it happened. And I can still remember those people, you know, looking up and the plumes of smoke going in each direction. And we wondered, could the astronauts live through this? And then, of course, we had several hours of not knowing. But, you know, it was a significant story. And it began CNN's road.
How long has CNN been around before you joined up with them?
It had been, they went on the air January 1st, or no, May 31st of 1980. And then Headline News went on the air January 1st of '82. When we used to be in the old building at 1050 Techwood Drive, Ted Turner would come down in the middle of the night sometimes in his pajamas and his robe. We were in an old 4-story brick building. It was a former community center. The swimming pool had been turned into a place where they put all the satellite dishes. We were in the basement, so light never penetrated that area. You could grow mushrooms. And CNN was on one side of the hall, Headline News on the other. Not a whole lot of employees.
Right.
And I can still remember Ted coming down middle of the night, sticking his head in there and going, "Bah, how do you do that thing all the time?" Well, I do it because you're paying me, Ted. And he'd give a little wink and go on down to the kind of a latter-day Hugh Hefner. Go down and get something to eat and go back up to his penthouse.
How would you describe Ted Turner? What's your person?
Wow. You know, there's one of the harder descriptions to do, because he can be extremely effusive in his praise, and he can be angrier than a hornet.
I've heard he has a pretty hot temper.
He does. He started taking lithium back around the mid-'80s, and that was prescribed by his psychologist or psychiatrist, Dr. Frank Pittman. And I think he's done well on that. Overall, he has few episodes, from what I understand, coming back that are of the angrier variety. But he is one heck of a sharp business person, because he saw the future of 24-hour news when no one else did. Everybody thought he's going to die on the vine with this thing.
Well, they thought that too when he started WTBS.
Well, you know, they've said the same thing about, you know, I often think back to, who was it, Gary Cooper. When he was offered the part in Gone with the Wind, he said, I'm sure glad it's going to be Clark Gable falling on his face and not Gary Cooper. Well, we see how things change. Or Western Union, when the phone was invented, saying, gee, that has too many shortcomings. It's of no, what do they say, apparent value to us.
So I guess could you say he's a visionary?
Clearly. Not only a visionary, but a man who knows how to milk the most profit out of what he's got. Because you could see in the tiering that he did at CNN. In other words, he would have his Atlanta Braves play baseball after he bought the team. He'd sell the memorabilia. He'd sell some of the TV rights. He'd use the other TV rights on TBS and make money off the cable portion of it, sell the games locally. And he would have different arms going out in different directions. So, no, he's nobody's fool. No.
Why do you think so many people think he's nuts or crazy?
Maybe they're his competitors. Rupert Murdoch always thought that.
Yeah, I mean, is it because of the outbursts, or is it because they don't understand where he's going?
Well, for every one who thinks he's crazy, there are 10 who are on his side. You look at the members of his board, even before he was bought by Time Warner, and then Time Warner merged with AOL. He had people from Comcast, Continental Cablevision, Time Warner. You could almost name the different companies that were more than happy to be on board with Ted Turner, because not only did his persona exude a certain confidence, sometimes arrogance, that said, hey, either lead, follow, or get the you-know-what out of the way. And that's been Ted's theory all the way along. He would literally roll the dice. He rolled the dice when he put TBS on, when he sold the billboard company, and then put TBS up on the bird. And then he did it all for CNN. He did it all with everything he's tried. And now here he is, you know, a multi-billionaire. So he's done something right.
I guess that's a lesson for people who don't have faith in their dreams or faith in what they're doing.
Oh, you know, how many of us limit ourselves because we don't think outside of the box, or we don't think we could do something? I'm not sure I ever thought that I would ever be working for CNN as an anchor for all those years, because I was a little kid raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Right.
I mean, and Tulsa's a wonderful city, but you don't look at it as New York or Washington, D.C.
No.
It is a city of really good people, and many people stay there all their lives and have every success. In broadcasting, if you want to go bigger, well, then you've got to take some chances, and you've got to push the envelope, and you've got to believe in yourself. I'm the same guy that was at KOTV 20 years ago. A few more lines to the face, perhaps, walk maybe a step slower. But overall, I'm that same guy. But I have a little more confidence. Perhaps I have a little more knowledge of the world. And I believe in myself under all circumstances because of the experience CNN taught me.
When you watch CNN now, there's a lack
and I don't laugh to be laughing at it.
But there seems to be a lack of spontaneity that there was in the original days.
You know, you and I talked about that before we sat down here. In many ways, you know, CNN has always had that reputation that we will not promote the anchors as the stars.
Right.
Now, you might be able to mention Lynn Russell at Headline News, Bobby Batista on Talkback Live, Bernie Shaw, Judy Woodruff with their evening news, Larry King, who does Larry King Live, obviously. You might know those people, but you might not really know a lot of others. And they have done that, I think, on purpose, because I think they want the news to be the star.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, you can look at it as NBC has, with MSNBC and CNBC, that if you promote people like Jane Pauley and Matt Lauer and John Gibson and Soledad O'Brien and the list goes on, Katie Couric, then you're going to get a little extra zing to what you do. You're going to pay them a lot more, but you will develop personalities. And it's just two different ways of looking at things. At headline news, they've always thought that the best way to do it was just to do it simply. One anchor. Well, originally they had co-anchors, as you know.
Right.
But then they found they could do it with one anchor in place of two. And so they saved money there. Now they digitize everything. None of headline news is live. Not any of it.
I see a lot of people still believe it is because
they believe it is
because
it looks so perfect and so clear. But what they're doing is recording one story at a time. And the anchor will record maybe the lead, and then maybe the intro into the stock report, and then maybe a close to the whole show for the half hour. Then they may go back and record a couple of voiceovers, a couple of intros into packages, things like that, all at different, times. And they'll record that over 2.5 hours, play it for 6 hours, and so what you see at maybe 11 o'clock in the morning is the same thing you'll see at that exact same time at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But because you're not watching that whole time, you won't know that it doesn't, that there is no camera person. The cameras are run out of the, there's only one camera, and that's centered up by somebody in the control room. The teleprompter is run by the headline news anchor. Every now and then you'll see the hands down here playing with a little gizmo, and that's the prompter. But they save a lot of money, plus they give you all the news that, really is of a headline nature that you might want to see. Now, if you really want to get the news, I'd say I'd open up the paper. I'd read the Washington Post, or the New York Times, or the LA Times, or USA Today. And you get a little bit more, but most of us like being spoon-fed by TV.
Yeah. Now, of course,
I'm going to grab a little more water here.
CNN almost had a major scoop once, didn't they, with when George Bush fell ill in Japan?
Oh, what a story that was. That was 1990. Don Harrison was on the air. And bless Don's heart, he passed on May 1st of 98. This was his third bout with cancer. And it got him the final time. And I don't know how old Don was at the time, I think 59. But anyway, on this particular day in 1990, here's a man with 35 years of experience behind him. He's sitting out on the set and he's reading along, and suddenly, in Tokyo, remember, President Bush slumps beneath the dinner table.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going on. And they cart him off to the side. A call comes in to a medical correspondent upstairs at CNN, which is one floor above headlines, or 2 floors. And the caller says, this is the president's doctor, Dr. Burton Lee. And we want to let CNN know that the president has died. We want you to know that first. And I'll give you my callback number and everything. So the medical correspondent, thinking he has the scoop of the decade, puts it in the README file in the computer, which is not necessarily for on-air use.
Right.
But just to notify everybody, we have a report from a man purporting to be Dr. Burton Lee that the president has died. We're efforting more information on this story. Well, what happened was Don Harrison's sitting in the chair, and the line producer who's in the booth trying to produce the show and keep it rolling, is the only one who really sees it. The supervising producer's not at their desk. So I think they would have caught it. But the line producer just saw this pop up, got on the IFB, or the little device that the anchors wear that they can hear the producer and whatever else is going on, and said to Don, I want you to read that, Don. We need to do it first. Because there's always this battle between headline news and CNN to get stories on first. They're two competitive networks, even though they use the resources of the network in the same way.
Plus you're in competition with all the other networks,
and you're in competition with the other networks. And Richard, it was just interesting because Don said, I don't think we should go with this. There's no corroboration yet. So the line producer runs down the hall and gets a senior supervising producer and says, hey, you need to get this guy to read this thing. So the senior supervisor comes down, and about 15, 18 feet away from Don says, Don, I want you to read that. Suddenly the tally light goes on over the camera, and Don can't stall anymore. He can't argue his point. Now, if he reads it, and it's wrong, you know what will happen. And if he doesn't read it, and it's true, you know what will happen.
Yeah, right.
So he's in a quandary. And he looks at the camera, and he says, well, we have some rather disturbing news involving President Bush in Tokyo today, as you know, and he goes into the story and he vamps about the story a little while, and he says, again, this disturbing news has no corroboration from the Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, the White House, and he's thinking of everything he can. He's about to say, my mother has not called with any information on this. And he looks to the left, and out there is the supervising producer going, Don, no, don't do it. Don't do it, Don. And so Harrison looks at him kind of funny, looks back at the camera and says, well, apparently we'll have that disturbing news for you a little bit later on. Let's go to Stu Varney at the business desk in New York, and of course he waves toward that window up there with Stuart Varney from New York. And so there are people out there, thousands of people going, what's this disturbing news thing? Meanwhile, CNN has pulled the thing out of the README file, which is why the producer waved him off. The real caller was an Idaho mental patient using a pay phone.
Pretty clever.
We came so close, but thanks to Don Harrison stalling just long enough that we, you know, I would have been wearing a little sack with little eye holes cut out because that's how embarrassed we would have been.
Speaking of the IFB, did you have an unusual experience with him when you first started out?
You know, we had a thing in Huntsville, Alabama, 1989. And we were covering a tornado that had gone through one of the main sections of town. 9 were dead, 32 injured, a lot of buildings destroyed. And we were doing live reports for various stations around the country. And Don and Mary in West Palm Beach were the anchors about to introduce me. And it was pretty cold out there, and there was a steakhouse behind me that had been reduced to rubble. All the brick was on the ground, and there was a little electrical hookup back there. So I hooked, or they hooked, actually the engineers, hooked up our lights and our camera and everything to this little electrical box back here so we'd have power. And that also powered my IFB so I could hear Don and Mary when they introed me. So here we are, it's the middle of the night, and we got a few lights on us, and it's cold, and I'm trying to concentrate on how many have died, how many injured. And Don and Mary, you know, say, well, we go live now to Bob Losure, who's standing by in Huntsville, Alabama. And I had the microphone in hand, and just as I opened my mouth, suddenly I heard in my ear, hey, Mac, I like 3 chicken fried steaks, 4 baked potatoes, a couple of Cobbetts. And I'm going, what on earth? And I was so worried. I was going to say there are 9 dead and 3 chicken fried steaks. And you know, I had you just want to concentrate. Because the guy kept going on.
Right.
He didn't stop there. Hey, I hear it. Sounds like some guy doing the news. Hello? Hello? Hey, are you guys there? And I'm hearing all this. Of course, the audience can't hear, fortunately. But I'm trying to stagger through the dead, injured, buildings destroyed. And eventually he went away, he hung up, and that was my experience in Huntsville, Alabama.
Now, of course, you went on with CNN, but you decided to leave CNN.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why exactly would you want to leave that job?
Well, there are a number of reasons. It seemed to me, they wanted to go in a different direction at headline news. They wanted to do what they're doing now, which is record everything, digitize it, cover it with video, and put it up there and let it play. So in other words, you record for 2.5 hours, and that'll play for roughly 6 hours. And you're not recording 2.5 hours of material. You may only be recording an hour and 15 minutes worth, but it takes you that long to do it. And I like live news too much. I like 180 words a minute, running and gunning, looking at that TV camera, giving it your best, knowing what you're reading, having a pace, knowing what's coming up. Because when you record it, you may not know what's on either side of it. Now, for what those folks do at Headlines, I think they do an excellent job. They're doing good news. But for me, I knew I'd done it long enough. And I thought, well, you know, you speak some, and you MC some things, and I'd been doing that for several years. And then I thought, the corporate video thing, that's something I can do. So I've worked with Walmart on their 401k plan over in Bentonville. I worked in Tulsa with many different firms there. And gosh, I speak all over the world. I've been to Busan, South Korea. I've been to Hong Kong. I was in San Francisco and Las Vegas last year. So I may have the best of all possible worlds because I work half as much, but when I'm on the road, it's really intensive, and I run from place to place.
Now, you're on the road a lot, and you get a chance to turn on TV in hotels.
What do you watch, Bob? Are you watching those movies on that? Yeah.
I mean, aside from the movies, you get to watch the news. You get to watch news a lot. You get to still get to see
I
CNN
do.
headline news, and you get
Sure.
to see local news.
Well, local news is its own thing, and much of it is good because the people care about their community, and that's important. One of the problems you get into is it's there to attract ratings. It's not there necessarily just to serve the public.
Right.
Because if they don't attract ratings, then the news director's fired, the anchors are fired, and they're all out on the street. Or even if they do kind of sort of good, it can happen. What happens with local news now, with all the consulting groups out there, is I think there's such an accent on crime news that it becomes the crime report at 10 o'clock.
Didn't you used to say if it bleeds, it leads?
Well, we've heard that for a long time, and we've railed against it, but yet we keep going with it because it does draw people into the tent.
How do consulting groups work?
Well, what they do is they'll put a focus group into a room. They'll get 12, maybe 15 people, and they'll run the local newscasters. They'll run clips, maybe 5, 7 minutes of each, of maybe 7 or 8 newscasters, including those at the competition. And then they'll say, who do you like among this group, and why do you like them? And then they'll list some stories and say, which stories would you rather hear about? You want to hear about that fire in the suburb? Do you want to hear about that baby kidnapping? Do you want to hear about the school board? Do you want to hear about the city council? Well, they're generally going to not say they want to hear about the school board or city council, because crime and fires and hurricanes and earthquakes seem to be bigger news getters. As a result, we lose out on those public kind of things that you can do through community access TV like no one else can. And through your governmental counterpart here on the other side of this building. One of the things that hits me is, and I was in Jessup, Georgia in '98 promoting my book. And when I was in Jessup, they had community access TV, and it worked. I happened to be there on a night when they had an election. And and I'm sure you've done shows like that here, where there are 3 stools, and there's one camera at the back of the room controlled by an operator who's controlling the microphones, and there are no commercials, and these are regular people. I just happen to be some guy from off the street promoting a book who happens to be an anchor man. And I came in and I sat down on one of the stools, and we talked about politics, and we talked about my book, and some people called in, and they could get on the air too, and if they wanted to buy the book, just come on down. We're down here at 4th and Elm. You know, we'll be here. Bob's going to stick around a while. And when you finally get tired of talking after about an hour and a half, although you can see I never get tired of talking, but after you get tired of pontificating for a while, they'll read a few voting results, then throw it back to you. Well, eventually you say, because the camera's on you all the time.
Yeah.
And you finally say, can I go now? And you get off the stool, and somebody else comes and sits on that wooden stool with the other couple of guys, or women, and you're off and running again. So it was an interesting way for that community to express its opinion, to give people some, because they would never get the Jessup, Georgia voting results until the next day.
That's right.
This way you're getting it during the time it's happening. So it was a wonderful service and could prove valuable, let's say if you had a major fire, if you had a tornado come through town, if you needed to get the Red Cross to people. Boy, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread when you need it.
Television itself, I guess, could be a great medium if it was used right.
Well, not only that, but there are times when TV does a great job when there are no emergencies. Just like what you do on a Monday evening and Tuesday during the day, when you allow people to come by and record what they'd like to say for 5 minutes. It's not a wasted 5 minutes for those people, because you're on your cable channel here, you're 8, you're between ABC and NBC, so even we guys who are there with a clicker going through it are going to come right across you. And so you may in many ways have something that people couldn't get any other
We call
way.
it People's Revolutionary Television.
Well, that's okay. And you can run any kind of programming. People can rent out the equipment. I understand they get a 3-course deal in editing, shooting inside, shooting outside, and then they're told, go out, shoot whatever you want, come back and edit it, or we'll edit it for you at $50 an hour. And they got the best thing going. And I think it's a wonderful tool.
I think it's always a constant education process, but people finally discover it and make great use of it.
Well, and now you see it all across America.
Actually, all across the world now. I just met a woman who's starting up public access in Guatemala.
Wonderful.
Now they're putting up a wall around the studio in Guatemala because they're afraid of like somebody storming it with guns.
Revolutionaries.
Yeah, well, I guess the native peoples are very happy, very excited about it, but they're going to have this whole building. Just
Congratulations.
It's pretty cool. And it's starting in South Korea and South Africa and Ireland. So public access is picking up all across the planet.
Well, as it picks up, will there be the kind of money put into it, do you think? And I know you're asking me questions, not me asking you, but I'd like to find out, is there going to be some money put into it to make it truly interactive in communities, where you can have the kind of forum where people can talk back to you live?
You know, that only depends if the community uses the channel. If you have a community where people don't care, or they don't realize the value of it, you won't get that kind of money. It's only communities that are active and realize the channel for the treasure it's worth, then you'll maybe get that kind of money. But a lot of stations take themselves for granted. They stop doing community outreach. And I've seen this a lot of times. And then comes time, they get their budget cut and nobody in the community supports them because the station's forgotten their roots.
So the key is to get people involved.
Right.
Because once they're involved, then they go to City Hall and they say, hey, we like what you're doing there. And then City Hall allocates more money for it.
That's right, and it works too. And a lot of times if your budget is threatened, the people will come down and speak on your behalf, except those few stations that have forgotten that lesson.
Well, Richard, as president of the board here, you've had a lot of responsibility, and part of that is public relations. Well, that's okay. That's okay. You look distinguished. You look good.
Public relations is an art into itself. It teaches you a certain amount of diplomacy you wouldn't ordinarily have. So I never thought I'd be developing.
We could all learn
skills.
from it.
Yes. Do you ever have the desire to jump back into TV?
Wow. You know, when there's a breaking story, like JFK Jr.'s death off the coast, or the Princess Diana death in Paris, when you've got a big story that's breaking, we haven't had any real wars break out lately, then you think about it. Yeah, you think, boy, that's interesting. Or I'll hear a fire engine going down the road. I wonder where they're going. Well, I've followed fire engines long enough in my life, and let them do their work, because what they're doing is saving lives. At the same time, I always will keep up with the news, or what I perceive to be news that's important to us on this planet. Because once you lose that, then you kind of lose touch with people. And when people come up to me and say, I don't watch the news, then my next question
and they're bragging.
Is,
they're bragging.
They're bragging. Not only do I not watch the news, I wouldn't watch you in 100 years. No, they don't say it quite like that. But they are saying they don't like what they feel, in many cases, what they'll generally gripe about is what they feel is a liberal East Coast bias of the news. And they may have a point, certainly on the national side. Or local news that's all, if it bleeds, it leads, and police crime tape.
Or fluff.
Or fluff.
For camaraderie.
Lots of teases. You know, you tease the tease. And your teases make up 1/3 of your newscast. And I can understand why people are angry over that. But if they're not going to get their news there, and they're going to be a viable citizen, and somebody who hopefully will cast a vote, somebody who will care whether zoning laws are changed in their community because it affects them.
Right.
Well, where do you get your news then? That's my question back to them. Do you read the newspaper? Well, if you're not getting any news, then we need to get you some.
Right.
Because otherwise you're going to lose the freedoms that a bunch of people fought hard to get for you hundreds of years ago.
It's sad. A lot of people don't see it that way.
I know.
And they're almost like they're bragging when they tell you just how inactive they are where it comes to civics.
When you look at those regimes or those countries that have been overtaken by totalitarianism, it's generally because the vote count gets low. The number of people participating gets low. More people feel estranged from government. Or, in many cases, the country simply becomes rich and lazy. And that could describe a lot of what we see today.
Yeah.
And when that happens, then we could be on the brink of getting the kind of people in power who don't have our interests at heart.
And then when we try to get them out through the voting booth, it's too late.
It's one. One leads to the other.
Yeah.
There's no disconnect in it. They're all linked.
Well, I hope more people see it that way. Bob, thanks very much for being on the air
Richard,
tonight.
you've been very kind to have me. Thank
Nice
you.
of you to be here. All right, thanks very much.
Hi, my name is Ana Aguayo. I'm with the Northwest Arkansas Workers Justice Center, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Access Television.
Right, so not just anyone can get to them. I'll safer when I'm playing outside.
Safer when walking home.
I won't have to tell so many family members. I'm sorry.
I won't hear as many scary stories.
Or scary news reports.
I won't have to hold someone's hand and shout you're gonna make it.
And I won't have to tell my kids, this isn't a drill.
Please.
Please,
Please. Please.
Please.
do it for us.
For us. Do it for us.
Your family, friends, and neighbors are all counting on you. Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. If you own a firearm and are not using it, please be responsible and be sure that it's stored in a safe place. Remember, always, lock it up. For more information on firearm storage safety, visit ncpc.org.
You turn on the television or you pick up a newspaper magazine, and all the information you see is just controlled by a handful of corporations. So how are you or I or any of us, how can we get our messages out to people? How can you tell people what you care about? You can go on Facebook and compete with hundreds of people who post things that may or may not be true. You can go on Twitter and post things with a handful of characters, because Twitter is really the place for literate people to hang out. Or you could go in with a sandwich board and walk the streets. You could write a letter to the editor. Or, even better, you could go to public access television. Public access serves your community on a first-come, first-served basis. And whether you're rich or poor, doesn't matter. It's first-come, first-served. Everyone in the community is welcome to come to public access and talk about not only the issues that are important to them, but if you have a poem to recite, a story to tell, a song to sing, just anything at all that's in your mind or a heart to tell, you come to public access. Public access in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where I'm speaking right now, has been around since 1980, and I've seen it change events in Fayetteville. And the nice thing about public access now in the 21st century is that it's not just on a television channel, but it's also on the internet, so you can reach people around the world. So if you feel frustrated at not being able to talk to people, not being able to get your message out, and you think there's no way to do it, well, take heart, there is. Public access, it's a vital component of our First Amendment rights. So public access, like the man says, use it or lose it.
My daddy was a man of letters. My mama was a head of state. They went and got their chromosomes together and gave me all of the recessive traits. I'm an embarrassment to evolution. My disposition is unstable and cruel. My blood's a catastrophic blend because I'm from the shallow end of the gene pool. Yeah, my IQ is a negative number. I got a sense of humor no one can stand. and my development was seriously encumbered by a deficient thyroid gland. I'm a social director's nightmare. At dinner parties, I just babble and drool. It's not easy making friends when you're from the shallow end of the gene pool. I'm from the shallow end of the gene pool. My x-rays make the doctors laugh. One time they tried to chart my EEG waves, but I wasn't even on the graph. Now biological research is booming. They're making breakthroughs like you wouldn't believe. They say genetic alterations in humans will one day soon be a reality. They're gonna give me a DNA transplant. They're gonna rearrange my molecules. Some natural laws will have to bend to get me from the shallow end of the gene pool. I'm from the shallow end of the gene pool. My x-rays make the doctors laugh. One time they tried to chart my EEG waves, but I wasn't even on the graph. My daddy was a man of letters. My mama was a head of state. They went and got their chromosomes together and gave me all of the recessive traits. I'm an embarrassment to evolution. My disposition is unstable and cruel. My blood's a catastrophic blend, 'cause I'm from the shallow end of the gene pool. From the shallow end of the gene pool. I'm from the shallow end of the gene pool.
Okay, the song's called A Back Porch Boogie. Well, I was sitting out on the back porch, picking with my brother Bill. I said, you know, I love the boogie woogie, and I probably always will. Sometimes we played on the front porch for the whole wide world to see. But when we come round back, it's a natural fact. It's a back porch boogie for me. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Well, you know I'm gonna let my hair down. I can even kick off of my shoes. Just a little bit of that back porch boogie will chase away all my blues. I got Brother Bill's bass on the backbeat, trombone playing on the drums. You know that feel when we all get together. It's a boogie woogie son of a gun. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Well, now at the scene from out of nowhere, there's people dancing in the yard. Ken and Andy playing their guitars, Dr. Blue's blowing on the harp. All our friends and neighbors start to gather round. Seems everybody wants to get a little closer to the back porch boogie woogie sound. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. porch boogie. Yeah, the back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Oh, the back porch boogie, you can boogie woogie all night long. Boogie woogie.
Yo, Richard, I don't know. I've been hearing all about this socialized kind of communist healthcare, you know, that Obama's coming up with and all this, this healthcare bill. It's bad news.
What? What?
Yeah, it's totally bad news.
What? Like what? Like what?
Well, okay. I mean, read the bill yourself. Page 29, okay? Admission, okay? This is a fact, all right? I read this on the internet,
Fact.
so I know it's a fact.
F-A-C-T, fact.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fact. Read it on the internet. It's got to be true. That your health care is going to be rationed.
Dude. Look right here. Look right here. I just happen to have it right here. You know? And it says right here, here's the truth. Page 29 continues to define the potential benefits package and discusses limits on what Americans will have to spend on health care under this minimum standard. In no way does this section stipulate the rationing of care.
That's an awful lot of big words.
I know that, sir. I know that, sir. We'll try to break it down. Health care, not rationed, dude.
Well, I don't know. I don't know where I stand on that. Are you sure that's the actual bill? Are you sure it's not just a bunch of lies?
Well, look at it this way.
Perpetrated by the liberal media?
This is also on the internet.
I don't know. I'm starting to think there may be two separate internets.
You might be right, sir.
All right. You know, on top of that, okay. They say that there's going to be a health choices commissioner. And the health choices commissioner is going to decide health benefits for you. You have no choice whatsoever in what you're going to get. None.
You know, given your mindset, Chuck, wouldn't you rather like the phrase health choices czar or health choices commissar?
Well, it'd about come to that, wouldn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
you might be right. You might be right. You didn't go to a healthcare rally at any point, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I was out there. I mean, I never got up to the mic or anything like that, but I was out there with everyone else just shouting, "Keep your government out of my Medicare."
well, I understand if Medicare gets run by the government, we're in serious trouble.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, but I know this on page 42, according to some conspiracy people. But let me tell you also, according to this website, the truth is, page 42 begins to describe the Health Choices Commissioner's duties, and the idea that this person will decide what benefits Americans receive is, well, it's kind of not true.
No.
I'm sorry. Now, given that most Americans will probably keep their current plans under reform, and Americans within the exchange will have the choice of purchasing many different kinds of health plans. Instead, the commissioner is going to establish minimum standards to protect Americans, like us, you and me, Americans.
Yeah. That sounds a little more reasonable. I don't know. It's kind of like instituting all these outfits like the FDA and whatnot to protect the meat. The market would protect the meat.
I understand that the market ultimately will protect all of us.
Mm.
You know?
Hasn't always.
It hasn't always. And children working in coal mines, they like it.
Yeah, free enterprise.
Yes.
I'm a poet. I am a poet. I know this because I bought a license, had it printed at a copy shop and laminated. Now I carry it with me in case someone asks. It gets me into all kinds of places. I am admitted without question into police stations, the back wards of mental hospitals, cadaver rooms of funeral homes. Everyone knows all poets are alike in some ways. Poets like to eat cabbage and beans. They handle rodents, steal from the produce counters of grocery stores, and peek into the eyes of the dead, searching out a glimmer of their own fear. Everyone knows poets are given to perversion. Poets like sex upside down from the rear with whips and chains, underwater and in public places. I knew a poet once who did it in a shopping mall. He flashed his poet's license. Everyone knew it was okay. Poets are found in all kinds of places. Their natural habitats are the window ledges of 20-story buildings, center lines of freeways, and circus high-wire acts. Everyone knows trouble follows poets. Their marriages will not take. Lovers die under mysterious circumstances. Their cars get repossessed. They get fired, arrested, picked up, committed, analyzed, and lobotomized more often than the general population. Poets live on the outskirts of credibility, in shanty towns surrounded by barbed wire to keep everydayness at bay. They slip on banana peels, tell sick jokes, pick scabs from the huge gaping sores of real-world encounters. Poets stay up all night, smoke and drink too much, shoot heroin each other and themselves. They swim in the blood of their comrades, paying homage to stars that burned themselves out years before they were born. And if you ask poets what they fear most, they'll answer right up without blinking. The thing they fear most is being safe and sane and normal. Given the choice, a poet will choose the path of a speeding bullet, even a speeding train or microbus, over the sanctity of a 50-year death.
Politics in general and jobs that don't pay enough, 40-hour work weeks, books full of boring stuff, schools that should teach but kids don't learn a thing. These are a few of my least favorite things. Healthcare that won't heal and how people treat the earth, paying tolls and taxes, disbelief in self-worth, bitter cold winters that cut into spring. These are a few of my least favorite things. Religions that claim they're true, don't get me started. Standards that double and people cold-hearted. Judgment and bias when freedom don't ring. These are a few of my least favorite things. All the lying, all the killing. When I'm depressed and sad, I add that to all of my least favorite things, and then I feel really bad. Feel like Julie Andrews or something.
Right, so not just anyone can get to them. I'll feel safer when I'm playing outside.
Safer when walking home.
I won't have to tell so many family members. I'm sorry.
I won't hear as many scary stories.
Or scary news reports.
I won't have to hold someone's hand and shout you're gonna make it.
And I won't have to tell my kids, this isn't a drill.
Please.
Please.
Please. Please.
Please.
Do it for us.
For us. Do it for us.
Your family, friends, and neighbors are all counting on you. Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. If you own a firearm and are not using it, please be responsible and be sure that it's stored in a safe place. Remember, always, lock it up. For more information on firearm storage safety, visit ncpc.org.